Okay, so this is going to be a video that covers how to document your assemblies. So the whole point of documenting an assembly is going to be to take what you're seeing on the screen here with the assembly and show how it fits together, any details that might be necessary to assemble it, and then kind of which parts and things you're going to use as well. Now, this is going to take place in one of these, it's underneath there, in a drawing file. All right, so we're going to create a new drawing file. You've got hopefully these different sizes. We're going to probably stick with the ANSI B inch. If you're not seeing that one, you go to show all templates, and then it'll be in here. So ANSI B inch will give us a good size that we can use, and we'll create a drawing file. Now, when we're doing this, the whole point here is we want to show as much information as possible about the assembly, but we're not actually including dimensions on the individual parts. That would occur in another page of our sheet. So I'm going to go ahead and just close that out for now. We'll come back to that. But you usually have multiple sheets in here. This little thing on the side is for. Typically the assembly comes first. Usually you'll have an exploded view if you can fit it on the same page or at least on another page, like a second page, and then after that come your parts in order. So we're going to focus on the first two there, just getting the assembly put in and then the exploded view created and put in. So we've got our assembly here. One of the biggest things that I found is the orientation that you see here in this home isometric view is the orientation that you are going to see. So if when you assembled this thing, you were assembling it off, or if you didn't remember to fix the first part, you're going to have a little bit of issue with how is it going to look once you get it put in here. So the orientation, when you click on this top front right, this little corner here, that orientation is what you're going to see. And I haven't found a great way to change that. So in the future, we'll take more care to get these things arranged the way they are. So in our drawing here, the first sheet is usually going to be the assembly. So we'll go ahead and hit insert, and we want assemblies. As long as you're still in this document, which you should be, the only assembly should be the one you've made. If you've made more than one, pick one. But we'll put in our tower here. So you can kind of see a little bit of a preview. There's my front view. Maybe I want also a right view, and maybe I want an isometric view. That's about all. When we get the isometric view, I'm going to use projected one more time and get an isometric. That's probably about all I really need. And in honesty, you might want to take a look at this and say, do these two views really help me out in seeing how this works? If you decide, no, they really don't, then it might not be a bad idea just to delete all these. There we go, delete them over there, and just put in a single isometric. You can do that as well. So if I click here, instead of putting in the view orientation as the front, I can put it in as the isometric, and now I can even change the scale here to make it a little bit bigger. Instead of 1 to 2, maybe I go 1 to 1, and that'll show me it a little bit bigger. For the isometric, for the assemblies, you're not putting dimensions in anyway, so there's no real reason to show top, front, right on everything, unless it actually helps you see how it goes together. So that'll be kind of our first view there. We've got the isometric view in. Other things that we're going to want to include are going to be an exploded view and a bill of materials, or a BOM. So let's talk about how to get that bill of materials and that exploded view, and that comes back into the assembly. I'm going to move my face over here because everything I'm using is on the right side of your screen. So one of the downsides of Onshape here is that if you've made all of your parts in separate part studios, they're all just called part 1. That's not a great name, not very helpful, but we can change that for sure. If we were doing these all in the same part studio, then they'd all have different names, part 1, part 2, part 3, and you can certainly change them to show that. Now, if you see here, I clicked on this first item here, which is bill of materials, or BOM table, and it just shows you the items that are in here. These are the order you put them in. This is how many are in each one. Right now, we don't have any part numbers specified. There's no dimensions specified. But one thing I do want you to do is to add a column for the name of the part. And then I'm actually just going to have you delete part number and description. What I will have you do now is change these names so that they don't all say part 1. You can give them a name if you want. You could also just use the names down here. So I could say, I could call this one. I could call that a cylinder, or I could just go through and say, okay, well, this is actually part 8. So I could just call this one part 8. Cylinder is part 7. So I could rename that one part 7. I'm going to try to make sure I remind you in the future to name these Part Studio names as something a little bit better, just so that we don't have to go through and worry about this so much. That one's part 6. You're just going to have to kind of look through. I just want them so that you see separate parts here. So this one's part 3. I think that one might be part 2. Never actually used part 1. Okay, so I've kind of updated my names here so that I can see them a little bit nicer. Again, in a real life situation, you'd want to name these things like wheel, if it was a wheel or something like that. Maybe you want to name them cylinder and whatever. But those are your BOM, your bill of materials. Updating that is going to help with the labeling of these parts. The next thing we want to do is make our exploded view. So we've got a tab down here, third one down is exploded views, and we're going to go into add exploded view. Now, it says here in the directions, we want to select the components in the graphics area or instance list and drag or rotate them using the manipulator. So each one of these things you can just kind of click on. And when you click on it, you're going to see that it's got arrows that go in the X, Y, and Z directions for that particular part. So for this one, it's, since I put it on this way, it's not the best. You can kind of see it doesn't really match up with what I particularly want to do with this part. But, what are you going to do? You can kind of drag this thing around so you get to different points, but eventually just going to have to pick one of those directions you want to go and move it in that direction. I'm going to get rid of this. There we go. Now you don't need to see me. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of drag these parts where I think they should go. So we'll click on a part, and you can kind of see that I can move it in some direction that I want to go. If I want to move it in that direction as well, I can do that too. But eventually I get it where I want it. Then I just keep doing that for different parts and kind of moving them around. Once you're happy with where you put it, hit the check mark between each one, then click on a different part. And maybe I want to bring that one out that way. Maybe I want to bring that one out that way. And that one I might just leave alone entirely, or I could bring it down just a little bit. If you're not happy with where one of these ended up, you can certainly go back and edit it after you've done it. If you wanted to not go quite as far, you can go in and change that kind of stuff. Once you're happy with how it looks, again, this is the whole point of this is just so that you can see it all apart and look at how it goes back together. Then just hit done. Now it looks like it went away. Don't worry, it didn't. It's still there. There's your exploded view. But we've gone and added a view that we can now insert into our drawing. So if we go back to the drawing and hit this refresh, you can do the exploded view first, and then you wouldn't have to worry about this. And now when I go to insert, I'm going to select as my explode position the explode one. And that's going to bring in my exploded view. You can see now it's a whole lot bigger. And I'm going to set it as I want it to be a isometric view. And that's too big, so I'm going to shrink it down a 1:2. So it's a little bit smaller. So I can kind of see how that goes in. Now you're going to see It's still got all of its direction things in there, so you can still see how they go together. And you've got a view of it assembled, you've got a view of it apart. From here, we're going to add two more things to the sheet. We're going to add callouts or balloons to each part, and we're going to add our bill of materials to the part. So first thing I might do here is click on the bill of materials. Right now, I can just kind of click. If you want to orient it or put it in a different corner, if I wanted to put it down here, I'd want to select this option so that it would snap into that corner. And just click and it'll automatically fill those in. You'll see that's the same bill of materials we just edited. It tells us what each item is, how many there are, and what they're called. You give those better names, that'll work helpfully, but whatever. Last thing we'll do here is add some callouts. Now, these things you could just leave them as table number. That's going to refer to these numbers in the table. If you wanted to add anything to it, like the actual name of the part, you can edit all of this. These are different places you can put things. So for example, if I wanted to not put the table number in, maybe I put the table number over here. These drop downs are all for the things that are inherent to the part themselves. So if we put in a part number, or if we put in a like a part name, we could include that. These ones are things that are inherent to this page. So the item number here, the part number that's showing up, which we don't actually have, a description which you can edit, or the number. We do want to make sure we include the item number, because that's going to help us figure out which one's which in the table. And I'm going to go ahead and put in the name as well. Then I just click on each individual part, and you'll see there it says 5, which is part 6. There's 3, which is part 2. There's 4, which is part 7. There's number 2, which is part 3. And number 1, which is part 8. And then when I'm happy with that, I hit the check mark, and you can see those balloons in there. You can, of course, go back and edit them. You can do different shapes. You can do different sizes, text, all of that kind of fun stuff. You can edit around, play around with that. Whatever you want to do. You'll see we can put it as none, so it's just the name there. That kind of looks a little bit better to me. But you've got options here as far as how those look. I'm just going to go back to circle. A lot of times what you will see is they'll just put the part number in there, the number in the table, and then you look it up down here. So if you don't like the way that looks, just leave it as the part number, the item number, and they'll show up there. Now, you'll notice there's no dimensions in here at all. The only place where we'd ever consider putting some dimensions in is if we wanted to tell somebody just a little bit of information about how this thing went together, like how far over that should have been or something like that. We could add some dimensions in there. But for the most part, at this point now, what we'd do is we'd insert a new sheet, and we'd put one in for every single piece. Typically what you do is, if there is, whatever part number is 1, in our case, this little bridge shaped thing is number 1. When I go over to the sheet and insert a part, I want to do Part Studios. That one's Part Studio 8. So I'd want to put that in, maybe make it a little bit bigger. I'd want to put this one in first, because it was the first part that was listed in the table. I'd like to have that first. This is where you'd actually go in and put the dimensions for these individual pieces. And so on this one, you'd have back here, you'd have the first sheet, which is your assembly and your exploded view, along with your bill of materials. And then there's 5 parts, so you'd have 5 more sheets, 1 for each part. Just to kind of show you another thing of what kind of that would look like here, to go back to one of mine that I've been working on. Once you start getting to the point where, not everything has to look the same, There are other things you'll start to see, especially on simpler parts. Here I have one where I've put 2 parts on each of those sheets. So that sheet has 2 parts. That sheet actually has 3 parts. That sheet has 3 parts. And then on the front, I've got an assembly with a few little dimensions just to kind of help me out overall, along with all of my balloons that show up over here. Main thing for these is just kind of saying which item is it and how many there are. I didn't put anything in about which part everything is, but you can kind of see that would be an example of something that uses this to help you out of seeing like, okay, there's 7. If I look up into my sheet here, number 7, there's 14 of them. So I would know how many there are of each one. So what you're going to be doing for this assignment here is basically what I just did for that tower. I want you to make an exploded view of the tower. I want you to edit the bill of materials in the assembly so that you have the names of the parts. You can name them like cylinder, bridge, cube if you want to, or you can just name them whatever part they are in the names along the bottom. I want you to put those into a document, a dimension document. You can do them either as a separate assembled and exploded view, or you can do them together like I did. And then I want you to include the callouts for each part along with the bill of materials in one corner, whichever corner it fits in. That's the assignment you're going to see linked for Thursday and Friday. And I'll see you back in school on Monday.